They came for judgment at sunrise, but no one in that valley knew what had happened in the dark. The first rider appeared through the morning mist just after dawn, his horse moving slow, breath rolling white into the cold air. Then another came behind him. Then 5 more. By the time Elias Mercer stepped onto his porch with a tin cup of coffee cooling in his hand, 200 Apache warriors stood across his land in perfect silence. Not one voice rose. Not one weapon lifted. They waited the way mountains wait, still enough to make a man hear his own heartbeat. Elias had lived alone for 11 years and had seen storms flatten barns, drought split the earth, and cattle wander off cliffs from foolishness. But he had never seen men gather like this without sound. The frost on the fence rails glimmered pale blue in the early light. Saddles creaked softly. Leather shifted. Horses stamped now and then settled again as if they too understood they were part of something larger than themselves. Elias set the cup down on the porch rail and looked once toward the cabin door behind him. It remained closed. The woman inside had not spoken since midnight. She had arrived half frozen, wrapped in snow and moonlight, stumbling from the north ridge before collapsing against his steps. He remembered the knock because it had not sounded like a hand. It sounded like someone using the last ounce of strength left in the world. When he opened the door, she fell forward into the lantern glow, dark hair wet with sleet, one shoulder torn through by brush, eyes fierce even in exhaustion. He had expected pleading. Instead she had looked straight at him and said, "If you are wise, send me away." Then she fainted before he could answer. Elias Mercer had once been called many things in 3 counties. Reliable. Hard-headed. Fair when fairness cost money. But no one had called him wise in years. So he carried her inside, laid her near the stove, and fed the fire until the room breathed warmth again. She woke once around midnight and reached for the knife on his table before realizing he stood 10 feet away, hands empty. "You fear me," she had said. "No," Elias answered. "I fear trouble. You just happen to be standing close to it." For the first time, she almost smiled. Near 1 in the morning, 3 riders came from the South Trail asking if he had seen an Apache woman traveling alone. Elias told them the truth carefully. "I've seen snow, wind, and men who ask too many questions." They left unhappy. He did not sleep after that. Now the morning had arrived carrying consequences. The front door opened behind him with a slow scrape of wood. She stepped onto the porch wearing his spare coat, too large for her frame, the collar turned against the cold. The warriors lowered their heads the moment they saw her. Elias glanced sideways. "Seems you forgot to mention something." Her eyes stayed on the riders below. Calm. Steady. Dangerous in the quietest way. "I mentioned enough," she said. Then she turned to him and spoke words that made the cold feel suddenly smaller. "You gave shelter for 1 night, Mr. Mercer. Now they have come to ask what kind of man you are." Elias Mercer had spent most of his life around men who tried to look important. They usually spoke first, moved too fast, or wore too much silver. The people standing across his pasture did none of those things. They sat their horses straight and silent beneath the pale morning sky, wrapped in blankets and winter leather, patient as stone. It unsettled him more than shouting ever could. The woman beside him stepped forward 1 pace, and the entire line of riders lifted their eyes at once. Respect moved through them like wine through dry grass. Elias noticed it because respect cannot be faked. It changes the spine before it changes the face. "You might have told me your friends were coming," he said. "If I had," she answered, "you may have closed the door." Her voice was stronger now, the weakness of the night gone from it. In daylight he saw what darkness had hidden. She was younger than he first believed, perhaps 30, with steady brown eyes and the kind of posture that comes from carrying responsibility too early. A thin braid rested over one shoulder. At her wrist hung a strip of blue cloth stitched with tiny white beads. Not decoration. Meaning. Everything about her suggested meaning. Elias folded his arms against the cold. What exactly are they asking? She looked at him for a long moment before answering. Whether the man who offered shelter did it from kindness, fear, or profit. I did it because snow kills people, he said. That is still an answer, she replied. One rider at the front dismounted and walked his horse closer to the fence. He was broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, and carried himself with quiet authority. He stopped 20 feet from the porch and placed his palm over his heart. Then he spoke in Apache, low and measured. The woman listened without interrupting. When he finished, she answered with only a few words. He bowed his head and stepped back. Elias had seen governors with less dignity than that man. Well, he asked. He says my people owe you thanks, she said. And he says some debts bring trouble with them. Elias gave a dry laugh. That part one understand in any language. She turned then, facing him fully for the first time since daylight came. My name is Nayeli. Elias Mercer. I know. That gave him pause. How? There are lonely men in these hills who help strangers and ask for nothing. Stories travel farther than wagons. He did not know what to do with that, so he looked past her toward the horses. The old rider was now watching the south trail. Others had turned the same way. The air changed. Animals felt it first. Ears lifted. Hooves shifted. Even the morning birds went quiet. Nayeli's jaw tightened. The three men from last night? Elias asked. No, she said softly. Worse. Men who smile before they steal. Dust rose beyond the cottonwoods at the edge of his land. 5 riders this time, not 3. Town saddles. Store-bought coats. The kind of men who measured worth by what they could carry away. Elias sighed, almost tired enough to laugh again. Seems my porch has become popular. Nayeli looked at him, and something gentler passed through her guarded expression. You can still walk inside and close the door. Elias rested one hand on the porch post worn smooth by years of weather. Ma'am, he said, eyes on the approaching dust, I opened it once already. The 5 riders came across the pasture like men who believed every road belonged to them. Their horses were well fed, their coats too clean for honest work, and brass buttons flashed whenever the sun found them. The one in front wore a black hat with a silver band and smiled before he reached the gate. Elias disliked him immediately. Good instincts had saved more men than fast hands ever did. The rider reined in and looked first at Elias, then at Nayeli, then at the 200 silent warriors beyond the fence. His smile thinned, but it did not leave. Morning, Mercer, he called. You have become popular. Morning, Harlan Pike, Elias answered. Still talking before thinking, I see. A few of the Apache riders watched without expression. Pike noticed and adjusted his tone the way merchants adjust prices. No offense meant to anyone here. We are only searching for stolen property and a woman tied to it. Nayeli did not move. You found neither, she said. Pike turned toward her, studying her face carefully. That depends who is asking. It depends who is lying, she replied. The men behind Pike shifted uneasily. They had expected a frightened fugitive, not a woman who spoke like a judge. Elias leaned one shoulder against the porch post. You came all this way for words, or did you bring something useful? Pike ignored him. A wagon from Red Mesa was robbed 2 nights ago. Maps were taken. Trade markers too. Important things. Nayeli's eyes narrowed. You mean papers that prove whose water you tried to claim? The smile finally slipped from Pike's face. Around the pasture, the horses of the Apache riders began to move in slow restless circles, not from fear but readiness. Elias noticed details the way lonely men learn to do. The old gray-templed rider had moved closer to the front. Two younger men watched the tree line. Nayeli kept one hand hidden in the folds of his coat, likely resting on nothing more dangerous than calm. Yet everyone there seemed to measure themselves by her stillness. "You should be careful," Pike said. "A woman alone can misunderstand business." Nayeli almost laughed. "And a greedy man can rename theft." Elias let out a low whistle. "She has you there, Harlan." Pike glared at him. "This does not concern you." "It concerned me when you rode onto my land." Pike drew a folded paper from his pocket and held it high. "Signed claim. County seal. Water rights extending through these hills." Elias did not ask to see it. Men who wave papers from horseback usually hope no one reads them. Nayeli stepped off the porch and walked down the frozen path until she stood halfway between both sides. Wind lifted the edge of the borrowed coat. "That seal was bought," she said. "Those lines were drawn by men who never walked this ground." Pike's jaw tightened. "Then prove it." She looked back once at Elias. "I can." Then she faced the riders behind the fence and spoke a single phrase in Apache. The old man dismounted, reached into a saddlebag, and carried forward a long leather tube wrapped in red cord. Even Pike recognized value when he saw it. His men straightened in their saddles. Elias watched Nayeli accept the tube with both hands, careful as church silver. "What is that?" he asked quietly. She did not look at him when she answered. "The reason they chased me through the snow." Then she untied the cord, and every man present forgot the cold. Nayeli drew the contents from the leather tube with slow, steady hands. It was not gold. It was not silver. It was paper, thick and weathered, rolled around a cedar rod and marked with lines so careful they looked carved instead of drawn. Even from the porch, Elias could see rivers, ridges, springs, and old trails crossing the hills he had known for years. But there was something else on that map no county clerk would ever bother to mark. Graves. Orchard sites. Winter camps. Places where children had been born and old people had been buried. A life written onto land. Pike knew it too. The color left his face the way warmth leaves iron. "That belongs in the county office," he said sharply. Nayeli did not raise her voice. "It belonged to my grandfather before your office was built." The wind passed through the cottonwoods with a dry whisper. Somewhere a horse snorted and stamped. No one else moved. Elias had seen deeds before. Men loved papers because papers did not speak back. This one seemed to speak. Plenty. Nayeli turned the map so all could see a blue mark near the northern ridge. "Springhouse Creek," she said. "Your claim says the source begins on purchased land. This map shows the spring farther east, inside our protected ground." Pike forced a laugh that fooled no one. "A drawing made by tribesmen is not law." The old gray-templed rider stepped forward and answered in careful English. "It became law when your surveyor copied it." That landed harder than any shout. Pike looked suddenly older. "You have no proof of that." Nayeli reached again into the leather tube and removed a smaller folded sheet. "County paper. Fresh by comparison. A signature in blue ink. A seal pressed crooked in wax." Elias could not read the words from where he stood, but he recognized the shape of panic when Pike saw them. "Your surveyor sold 2 maps, Nayeli said. One to the county. One to us after regret found him." A murmur moved through Pike's own men. "Tiny. Dangerous. Men who follow greed stay loyal only while profit seems certain." Pike straightened in the saddle and gathered what pride remained. "Even if true, this changes nothing. Water must be developed. Roads built. Trade expanded. Progress does not wait for old stories." Elias finally stepped down from the porch, boots crunching frost. "Funny thing about progress," he said. It usually arrives asking other people to pay for it. A few of Pike's riders glanced away to hide smiles. Pike ignored them. Mercer, stay out of matters beyond your fence line. Elias looked across the pasture he had fenced post by post with hands now stiff in winter mornings. Then he looked at the spring hills beyond, pale in the distance. That creek waters my cattle in August, he said. Seems your lie reached my fence after all. Nayeli turned toward him, surprise flickering across her guarded face. You did not know. Yesterday I knew less than I thought about many things. The old rider almost smiled. Pike saw the ground shifting under him and pulled hard on the reins. You all think this ends with a paper, he snapped. Men in town decide these matters. Nayeli rolled the map carefully and tied the red cord again. Then we will visit town. She handed the tube to Elias. Will you keep this safe until noon? He stared at the object in his hands, lighter than a rifle and somehow heavier. Why me? She met his eyes. Because every liar here knows you cannot be bought. Then she walked toward his barn as if the rest of them had already agreed. Elias Mercer had not held anything fragile in years. Tools, reins, fence wire, sacks of feed, maybe a coffee cup if the handle had not broken yet. But the leather tube in his hands felt like something that could crack from careless breathing. He carried it into the cabin and laid it on the kitchen table beside a loaf of bread gone hard at the edges. Through the window he could still see Pike and his riders waiting near the gate, pretending patience. Outside the larger circle of Apache horsemen remained calm as winter trees. Inside, the room held the smell of cedar smoke and melting frost. Nayeli entered a moment later and closed the door behind her. For the first time since she arrived, the noise of the world stayed outside. She removed his coat carefully and folded it over the back of a chair. You keep strange company, Elias said. So do you, she answered, glancing at the map tube. Most men would have handed that to Pike for a sack of money. Most men have leaks in the roof. She looked up at the ceiling beams and noticed the patched boards. You need shingles. I need fewer visitors. A small smile touched her face and disappeared before he could be sure it had been there. She crossed to the stove, checked the kettle, then moved about his kitchen as if she had known it for years. She found cups without asking, poured hot water, and dropped in dried mint leaves from a pouch at her belt. Tea, she said. For thinking clearly. Coffee does that. Coffee makes men believe they think clearly. He accepted the cup anyway. The steam carried a clean sharp scent that cut through the stale loneliness of the place. He hated noticing that. Nayeli sat opposite him at the table. Morning light rested on the braid over her shoulder. Without the storm and urgency around her, she seemed less like danger and more like someone who had learned to wear danger. Because the world insisted on it. Why trust me? He asked. I did not, she said. I trusted what people lose when they lie. And what is that? Stillness. Elias considered that. Then Pike is bankrupt. This time she laughed softly, a sound so unexpected it changed the room. He realized how long it had been since laughter crossed those walls. Long enough that the boards themselves seemed to listen. Nayeli reached into the beadwork pouch at her wrist and placed a small carved token on the table. It was cedar shaped into a horse no bigger than a thumb. Worn smooth from years of handling. My brother made this when he was 10, she said. He said horses know the road home even when riders do not. Elias turned it in his palm. Fine knife work. Patient hands. Where is he now? Her gaze moved to the stove flame. Gone 3 winters. No tears. Just weathered truth. Elias set the carving down gently. I am sorry. I know, she said. That startled him more than grief. She studied the room, the plain shelves, the repaired chair legs, the single photograph turned face down on the mantel. You had a wife. It was not a question. Elias looked toward the mantel and then away. Long ago. Nayeli did not press. Good manners often come from sorrow. Outside, a horse whinnied sharply. Then came the crunch of boots on frost and Pike's voice from the porch. Smooth again. Dangerous again. Mercer, he called through the door. I came to make you a generous offer. Elias rose slowly. Nayeli remained seated, but her eyes sharpened like drawn steel. There, she said quietly. Stillness gone. Elias Mercer opened the door only wide enough to remind the world it was his. Harlan Pike stood on the porch with snowmelt on his polished boots and a smile rebuilt in haste. Behind him, two of his men waited by the steps, trying to look useful. Beyond them, the Apache riders remained where they were, silent as fence posts and twice as steady. Pike lifted a gloved hand as if arriving for supper instead of trouble. Mercer, I prefer private business. Then you should have brought a smaller audience, Elias said. He did not invite the man in. Pike glanced past him, hoping to see the table. The map, the woman, or weakness. He found none of them. I came as a friend. That must be new work for you. Pike let the jab slide. Men who need something often become patient. He reached into his coat and produced a heavy cloth pouch. Coins settled inside with a rich little sound that had persuaded many foolish people before. $500, he said. Enough to fix the roof, buy stock, and stop working winters. Elias did not look at the pouch. You forgot to mention what it buys. Simple. You say the woman left before dawn. You say no map was shown here. You say this morning has been a misunderstanding. From the table behind Elias came the faint clink of a cup being set down. Nayeli was listening. Pike heard it too and raised his voice a touch. There is no shame in choosing your own future, Mercer. Men survive by knowing which side wins. Elias rested one hand on the doorframe worn smooth by years of weather. And which side is that? Pike smiled again. The side with town law, railroad money, county papers, and men who can make life difficult. Elias nodded slowly. You forgot one more thing. Pike frowned. What is that? The side with bad manners. Pike's smile hardened. Think carefully. You live alone out here. That has been one of my better decisions. Behind Pike, one of his riders snorted a laugh before catching himself. Pike did not turn, but his ears reddened. He lowered the pouch and changed tactics. You think they respect you? He jerked his chin toward the Apache riders. You are useful for one morning. After that, you are just another white rancher standing on borrowed ground. Elias considered him for a moment. Maybe. But I would rather be used for kindness than paid for cowardice. The porch fell quiet enough to hear wind moving through the cottonwoods. Pike stared at him, measuring whether anger or charm might work better. Before he could choose, the cabin door opened wider and Nayeli stepped beside Elias. She wore calm the way some people wear expensive coats. In one hand she held the carved cedar horse. In the other, nothing at all. Mr. Pike, she said, you keep offering money as if everyone has your hunger. Pike straightened. I offer solutions. No, she said. You offer prices. She placed the cedar horse into Elias's palm and closed his fingers around it. The gesture was small, but every Apache rider watching seemed to notice. Keep that for me, she said softly. Then she looked back at Pike. At noon we ride to town. Bring your papers. Bring your witnesses. Bring the men who sold you lies. Pike's jaw tightened. You presume much. Nayeli tilted her head. No. I remember much. Pike stepped back from the porch. His polished boots slipped slightly on the frost, and the moment cost him more dignity than any insult could. He turned sharply and strode to his horse. Before mounting, he looked once more at Elias. "This day will cost you." Elias weighed the cedar horse in his hand and answered without heat. "It already paid me more than you offered." When Harlan Pike rode off, the frost seemed to breathe again. His men followed in uneasy silence, each one glancing back more often than proud men should. The sound of their horses faded down the south trail until only wind and leather remained. Elias stood on the porch with the cedar horse in his palm and the strange feeling that his life had been moved 2 inches to the left without asking permission. Nayeli watched the trail until the dust settled. Then she exhaled slowly, as if holding herself upright had required more effort than she cared to show. "He will gather friends," Elias said. "He has none," she replied. "He gathers debts." That sounded truer than most things spoken that morning. The old gray-templed rider approached the porch again, this time carrying a folded blanket and a small satchel. He offered both to Nayeli, then spoke in Apache with the careful tone of family and concern. She answered softly. The man nodded once and returned to the line of riders. Elias noticed respect again, but now there was affection mixed within it. "Your father?" he asked. "My uncle," she said. "My father no longer rides." She took the satchel inside and set it beside the stove. Herbs, dried roots, strips of jerky, clean cloth. A traveling life packed into little weight. Elias followed her in, shutting the door against the bright cold. "You should eat before town," he said. "So should you. I have bread. You have regret shaped like bread." She unpacked the jerky, found his skillet without asking, and soon the cabin filled with the smell of warming meat and sage. It startled him how quickly a room can remember it was meant for living. While she cooked, Elias saddled his horse through the back window of habit, checking straps and cinch by eye. He had not gone to town in 3 weeks and usually preferred 3 more. Towns asked questions, sold gossip, and charged extra for nails. Yet before noon he would ride there beside a woman who had crossed his threshold one night ago and somehow knew where he kept the skillet. "You always move around another man's kitchen like this?" he asked. "Only the ones with poor shelves," she said, adjusting a crooked stack of plates. He should have minded. Instead he almost smiled. They ate at the table in easy quiet. Outside, the 200 riders waited with the patience of people raised by distance. Nayeli broke the silence first. "Why did your wife's photograph face the wall?" Elias set down his fork. "You notice too much." "That is not an answer." He looked toward the mantel. "Because some mornings I wanted to remember her. Some mornings I wanted to survive." Nayeli said nothing for a while. Then she rose, crossed to the mantel, and turned the frame upright. Elias had not seen Clara's face in sunlight for months. Brown hair pinned high, eyes laughing at something outside the picture. "You should let the dead keep helping," Nayeli said quietly. "They are often better company than grief." He could not answer at once. The room had gone tender in a way he did not trust. To escape it, he reached for the leather tube holding the map. "We leave in 10 minutes. Nayeli nodded and pulled on her gloves. At the door she paused. "One more thing, Elias Mercer." "What now?" "If town turns ugly, do not stand in front of me because I am a woman." He took his hat from the peg and settled it low. "Then do not stand in front of me because I am stubborn." For the first time, her smile stayed long enough to be certain. Outside, 200 riders turned their horses toward the road, and the valley began to move. The town of Dry Creek heard them before it saw them. Hooves rolled across the frozen road like distant thunder, steady and measured, not the wild rush of raiders but the disciplined rhythm of people who knew exactly where they were going. Shop doors opened. Curtains lifted. Men who usually leaned easy against hitching rails suddenly found reasons to stand straighter. Elias Mercer rode at the front beside Nayeli, the leather tube secured across his saddle, and wished for the 100th time that he had chosen a life farther from other people. Dry Creek sat in a shallow bowl of dust and pride, with one church, one saloon, one feed store, and enough opinions to fill 3 counties. Today all of them seemed gathered on Main Street. Harlan Pike waited outside the county office beneath a striped awning, freshly shaved and dressed as if honesty could be buttoned on. Beside him stood Clerk Amos Tiller, a narrow man with ink on his cuffs and fear behind his spectacles. 2 deputies lingered near the steps, more interested in staying employed than in justice. Nayeli swung down from her horse in one smooth motion. No hurry. No show. The Apache riders halted in a long silent line along the street, their presence so calm it made everyone else feel noisy. Elias dismounted more carefully, knees reminding him of years he preferred not to count. Pike spread his hands wide. "Welcome to lawful proceedings," he announced. "You mean theater," Elias muttered. Nayeli heard him and the corner of her mouth moved. Inside the county office, the room smelled of paper, lamp oil, and old excuses. Shelves bowed under ledgers no one reread. A pot-bellied stove ticked in the corner. Townsfolk crowded the doorway and windows, eager to witness courage as long as someone else supplied it. Pike laid his claim papers on the desk with a practiced flourish. Signed, sealed, recognized. Clerk Tiller nodded too quickly. Nayeli placed the leather tube beside them and unrolled the map with both hands. The cedar rod touched wood like a gavel. The room leaned forward. "This predates your filing by 23 years, she said. "It marks Springhouse Creek at its true source." Pike scoffed. "Stories drawn in charcoal." Nayeli removed the smaller county sheet and set it beside his papers. "Then explain why your surveyor copied the same line before changing it for payment." Tiller went pale enough to match the walls. Pike turned sharply. "Do not look at him. Look at me." But everyone was already looking at Tiller. Ink-stained men rarely become the center of a room unless trouble has chosen them. Sweat gathered at his temple despite the cold stove. "I only processed what was submitted," he stammered. Nayeli said nothing. Silence did what accusations often fail to do. Tiller swallowed hard. The original markers were altered after hours. A murmur swept through the doorway like dry leaves. Pike's confidence cracked by a hairline nobody could miss. "You lying little rat," he snapped. Deputy Moran cleared his throat. "Careful now, Mr. Pike." Elias almost admired the timing. Courage often arrives once a crowd is large enough. Nayeli kept her eyes on Pike. "You purchased water that was never for sale. You tried to buy men who were. Today you lose both." Pike looked around for allies and found arithmetic instead. The deputies had stepped away from him. Tiller was wringing his hat. Town merchants suddenly studied their boots. Outside, 200 riders waited without moving an inch. Pike's shoulders lowered as if some invisible weight had finally chosen honesty. He jabbed a finger toward Elias. This meddling rancher caused all of it. Elias removed his hat and brushed dust from the brim. "No," he said quietly. "I just opened a door." By sundown, Dry Creek had discovered that truth spreads faster than gossip when enough people witness it. Harlan Pike's claim papers were seized, Clerk Tiller surrendered names before anyone asked twice, and the deputies suddenly remembered their duty in remarkable detail. No one cheered. Real justice rarely arrives with music. It comes with lowered eyes and men pretending they always meant to do right. Elias Mercer preferred that kind. He stood outside the county office while townsfolk avoided meeting his gaze, each person carrying the quiet embarrassment of having doubted the wrong man and underestimated the wrong woman. Across the street, Apache riders waited in patient rows while their horses cropped dry winter grass between patches of frost. Nayeli emerged from the office last, carrying the leather tube beneath one arm. The crowd parted for her without being told. Respect, Elias had learned, walks differently than fear. She stopped beside him and looked up at the late afternoon sky turning copper over the rooftops. "It is finished," she said. "For today," Elias answered. "That is how all worthwhile things finish," she replied. They rode home with the sun behind them and the valley glowing gold as if the land itself approved of being named honestly again. Halfway back, the riders peeled away in groups, turning north and east toward distant ridges. No orders were spoken. They simply knew where to go. By the time Elias reached his gate, only Nayeli and her gray-templed uncle remained. The old man dismounted, clasped Elias by the forearm, and spoke a few words in Apache. "What did he say?" Elias asked after the man rode off. Nayeli watched her uncle disappear into dusk. "He said a lonely house should not stay lonely if the door is good." Elias grunted. "Your people are fond of saying much with few words." "So are you," she said. Night settled gently over the ranch. He fed the horses while she stirred beans on the stove. He repaired the loose hinge on the porch while she stacked wood straighter than he ever had. She turned Clara's photograph toward the room each morning and never once treated memory as competition. Days became weeks in the quiet way seasons do. Some mornings Nayeli rode to the hills and returned with herbs, game, or news. Some mornings Elias found himself humming without permission. In spring, the creek ran clear and full through grass bright as new paint. One evening he came in from mending fence and found a second coffee cup already waiting on the table. He stood there longer than necessary, hat still in hand. Nayeli glanced up from slicing apples. "Are you ill?" "No." "Then sit down." He did. They ate by lamplight while rain tapped softly on the roof he had finally repaired. After supper she placed the small cedar horse in front of him. "My brother believed horses know the road home," she said. "I think he was right." Elias turned the carving in his rough hands, then looked at the woman across from him, steady-eyed in the warm glow of the lamp. "Nayeli," he said, voice slower than usual, "I do not know much about starting over." She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Good," she said. "Neither do I." Outside, the rain deepened, kind and steady on the shingles. Inside, two people who had survived many winters listened to it together. Out here, love did not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it came the way mercy does. One knock. One open door.